All right, so in this class, we deal with culture, obviously. Now, I want to, and those of you that have taken LAS 222, US Latino History, have learned this slide before, but for the majority of you who have not, I want to introduce you to three different ways of thinking about culture, and the third one being the one I encourage. The first one is traditional culture, which had these associations of being associated with quote unquote high culture. It was this idea that people who were educated had culture, and those that were not well educated did not have culture. In particular, what they valued as in order to be cultured is to be educated in the history and music and art of Europe. Now, there's the way that people, a more recent definition or understanding of culture is the way that it is popularly used in the United States today. And that is this idea that culture is associated with ethnicity, with nationalities, in particular with people that are different, that are foreign. And so yeah, in this case, it gets thought of as having to do with dress and customs and rituals and yeah, music and dance and food. But one of the issues with it is that we end up associating culture with that which is foreign. And the unstated implication there is that if you're a quote unquote normal white American, it's like you don't see your own culture. It's as if you don't have culture, but that's not true. Everyone has culture, not just the people who are foreign and different from us. Um, so the way I want to encourage you to think of culture is a more academic way. It's the way that cultural anthropologists have been talking about culture for decades. And this is that culture is about a way of thinking. Culture is about lifestyle. This says culture is the way you think, act, and interact. So it includes this stuff, but it is not just about that stuff. It's, for example, and so yeah, there's lots of different types of cultures, and we can participate in lots of different cultures. So again, these are introduction to three different ways of thinking of culture. The third one is the one I want to encourage you to subscribe to. Here, you don't have to write all this down. My focus is on language, but this helps to show how culture is multifaceted. But I also want to emphasize here that language is a huge, what's the word? It's like language can, kind of limits or sort of a worldview. And so when you learn different languages, you have access to lots of different cultures that you don't when you have just one language. And so we may, if when we only understand one language, we may not be aware of how we're excluded from all the other things we could learn about if we had if we had access to other cultures through their languages. And so languages is key. Now I want to introduce you to two different theories on culture. I'm comparing Gramsci to Hall, and I'll first talk about Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci. And very succinctly, Gramsci had an understanding of culture that said that culture came from the top and was imposed to the people at the bottom. And so, people think they choose culture, but they are being fed what to consume and what to think. And so in the old days, this would be like, there might only be, I don't know, 5 major newspapers. Or, back in the day before cable, there were only like, I don't know, like 15 to 20 TV channels. And so whatever could get on TV or get on that handful of newspapers, of major newspapers, kind of limited what the public was exposed to. And so in that sense, millionaires and billionaires today can control what information is released to the public. With regard to music and dance, it could be that the government or wealthy people encourage certain genres of music and discourage others. And here we're getting to these associations. Part of what we're going to think about a lot in this class is what are the connotations of the music? Because music is sound, but yet music can mean something to us. The same way that sounds, is how we communicate through language. But those sounds don't inherently mean, the word chair doesn't inherently mean chair. It's because we speak the same language that we're able to communicate that. And with music, similarly, music is just sound, but yet sound can communicate high class, sophistication, fear, I don't know, happiness, tranquility, etc. And so Gramsci, in short, explained culture as people think they're choosing culture, but they're being fed a limited set of options. And so they're being told what to consume, even though they think they're choosing. Today, we might refer to that as the algorithm, where the algorithm encourages you to find some things online in different, say, social media versus other things that you're not exposed to because you'd have to intentionally look for them in order to find them. This contrasts to Stuart Hall, who is associated with modern cultural studies, specifically the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies. And he has an opposite viewpoint, or he emphasizes the opposite, a bottom-up understanding of culture, or at least is demonstrating the agency that people have. And so, yes, there may be the government or corporations or wealthy people might encourage certain cultural ideas in music, but that doesn't mean, it doesn't matter how much they do that. People are going to give it their own meaning. People are going to give it their own interpretation. So this, let's see. One example could be Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. It's like, people hear born in the USA, da, 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 and they're like, yeah, patriotic. And then you listen to the song and it's a anti-Vietnam War song. And so yeah, it's just an example of how people interpret it in their own way. Yeah, an interesting one could be the Village People and the YMCA song, where it was adopted by the LGBTQ plus community for decades, associated with one of their anthems. And then now President Trump has it as one of his main songs. And so It's almost like, it's just, it almost, not that it doesn't matter, but even when people have a message in the song, or if that's encouraged by music companies or whatever, people still have agency to give it their own meaning and change the meaning of what it means to them, or what purpose it serves. And so this bottom-up approach, or this bottom-up theory, viewpoint, way of looking at culture is, even when there's some degree of power imbalance, people still find ways of giving it their own meaning, using it for their own purposes, interpreting it in their own ways. So they can't be controlled from the top down. Another important topic for this class is cultural appropriation. Um, a lot of times people assume that cultural appropriation is about cultural influence. But cultural appropriation is more like racism, in that it is about power dynamics, not just cultural influence. Uh, I define it as cultural appropriation is when members of a dominant culture appropriate the culture of a disadvantaged group, especially when the disadvantaged group is not acknowledged or does not benefit from the appropriation. And so it's not just about cultural influence, it's about power dynamics and basically stealing culture from others, in a way that doesn't benefit those others. So, what company was it? I want to say something like American Eagle that was using Native American designs and copywriting them, or whatever it is they do, patent them, copyright them, I'm not sure. And so there's Native American people that are artisans that have been doing this for 100 years at least, sort of selling them these artifacts. And then, sort of their culture is being appropriated. They're not benefiting in any way. Or another example, those of you that have taken my LAS 150 find out, for example, that in Spanish America, or Latin America today, they've had cowboy cultures for centuries. Before we had cowboy culture in the US Southwest, there was cowboy culture in other parts of Latin America, in Mexico, in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Argentina. These are all places with a cowboy culture that predated cowboy culture in the US. But for most of the 20th century, we created this US, kind of this idea of Western movies and Hollywood that spread this image throughout the world, as if people in the US were the first and only cowboys in the world. And in fact, even US white American cowboy culture got a lot of its influence and knowledge about the subject from Mexican cowboys, Mexican, indigenous, and Black cowboys in the Southwest. And all of that is completely erased. It's just, it's cultural appropriation in that there's a complete erasure of where it actually came from. And they don't benefit in any way from all the 100 years of Hollywood movies about Westerns, where they were, where Mexicans and Indians and Blacks were portrayed in negative ways for most of that time in those films. And so I would say that's another example of cultural appropriation. So it's not just about cultural influence, it's more like racism. Some of you may not be familiar with racism in terms of power dynamics. Very briefly, let's see, it would be a brief way to describe this. So anybody can be racist, but racism is larger, is about power dynamics. A way of understanding this might be by comparing it to sexism or classism. A poor person can be classist and say, you know, F you, Elon Musk, and all you billionaires. He's being, that person would be classist against billionaires. But a wealthy person doesn't need to be classist to benefit from classism. They're still benefiting from their wealth, and they don't have to be classist in order to benefit from their class. Or I, as a man, don't have to say sexist things to women in order to benefit from sexism in society. And similarly with racism, you don't have to say racist things to benefit from racism. Yes.
Benefit yourself.
Using using that power imbalance to keep a group in power. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, just an introduction to cultural appropriation and these issues of isms. Favorite genre. So I would like to begin by sharing with you my favorite genre.